Epic fail? No, the camper actually did pretty well. I just got a little carried away with my thumbnail editing there. What I want to talk to you guys today about is how the camper did. I just got back from a 5-day trip where I took it through Arizona, and it was as much of a trip to kind of de-stress and as it was to test the camper and see how it performed. I saw everything, put about 800 miles on the camper. I saw everything from 75 degree weather to 15 degree weather. Winds 45 plus gusts, and bright sunshine to snow and rain. So other than heat, which I have to wait to the summer to kind of see where it goes, I think I can give a pretty good report on how the camper did. So I want to talk about it and break it up into 3 parts. First, I want to talk about miles per gallon and general handling of the truck with the camper on it. 2, I want to talk about how well the camper did in the weather, particularly in the colder. I mean, 15 degrees that's pretty cold. And then finally, I want to talk about if there's any improvements now that I'd kind of lived out of the camper for a few days, had it on the road, any improvements that I could think that I might want to make. So let's talk about general handleability and gas mileage. So I have this on a 6-liter gasoline engine Chevy Silverado 2500. I found that on my trips, so if any of you guys are familiar with Arizona, it's a relatively mountainous state, and I went from Las Vegas, Nevada to Flagstaff, from Flagstaff all the way south to Tucson, and then back up. So you're going through a number of, mountain ranges, and all the way up to 7,000 feet in Flagstaff. And when I went on this trip, the weather was not perfect. So I hit some rain, I hit some snow, and some really gusty winds. So my gas mileage ranged from about 10.5 miles per gallon to as high as 12.5. Now, I probably, my truck pre-camper, I would get anywhere from about 11.5 to 12.5, depending on the nature of my driving. The gas fill up where I got 10.5 miles per gallon. I was heading from Las Vegas to Flagstaff. It was a very windy day. The weather service reported gusts of 45 plus, and a portion of my drive I was getting that direct headwind. And then, of course, going into Flagstaff, you're climbing some pretty good elevation, and you're passing. And not only are you climbing it once, but there's actually a couple different mountain passes that you hit on the way out there. So I got the best gas mileage driving from Phoenix to Tucson. It was a morning, there was no wind, and that was largely a pretty flat drive. So my takeaway is, I'm actually really happy with that. I mean, in ideal circumstances, I got the same gas mileage as the truck got without the camper, and I without the camper, my truck might have actually. I'm sure the gas mileage would have declined with a strong headwind and climbing all those hills, anyways. So. I know those gas mileage numbers don't sound great, but when you figure it's a full-size pickup truck, and that's probably largely what the gas mileage would have been, camper or not, I think that was pretty good. Another thing that I had some real questions about, and many of you guys might, is how the camper would hold up in gusty winds. And I sure got a test for that. And the answer is it did amazingly well. I always remember when I first put the camper on the truck, I looked up at it and I was like, holy crap, that's a really big camper. Or it looked bigger, or my initial impression was it seemed a lot bigger on the truck than I kind of imagined it would. My total height is about just under 10 foot, so it's actually in the truck camper world on the smaller end. But anyways, with all of the winds and stuff like that, I mean, yeah, you felt it, but it was nothing scary. You know, I had heard anecdotes from people before of, you know, having strong crosswinds and, you know, they were white knuckling on the steering wheel because the truck was going all over the place. And in fact, there was one time in one portion of the trip where I was behind it was actually two occasions where I was behind a pickup truck that had a large truck camper on it, and they did seem to be swaying around. Now, again, I was swaying around a little bit, and you know those big gusts would definitely hit it, and it would pull it a little bit. But it was nothing that I felt was scary, nothing that I felt was unsafe, nothing that really made me feel uncomfortable. And even later, on two occasions, I hit a pretty good snowstorm in and out of Flagstaff. There was one part where the road was pretty darn icy, and in one of the portions of the snowstorm, it was really windy also. And I had some concerns of, would I start sliding around a little bit because of the wind, all those forces pushing on the camper. And long story short is, camper did really well. I mean, there was literally occasions where I was driving it and, forgot the camper. Well, basically, other than being very conscious of the camper there because it's a new thing and I'm out testing it, I essentially didn't feel any difference driving around with a camper on the truck or not. So, kind of inexplicably, it did really well. And hills and stuff, yeah, occasionally I'd have to downshift, but I was able to my comfort level is about 65 or 70 on the freeway anyways, regardless of camper or not. I'm kind of a slow driver, I suppose. But, there would be occasions where I might have to downshift on some occasions. But there was never a point where I couldn't maintain speed or I felt like it was excessive. So for gas mileage and general handleability, I think the truck and this camper configuration it exceeded my expectations and did very well. Dealing with climate conditions. So like I said, the warmest I had was 75 degrees. I mean, that's literally the ideal temperature. The camper did great. The coldest I had was in Flagstaff, and at one night it got down to 15 degrees, which is pretty cold. I mean, I'm sure some of you watching this might be in places that get colder than that, but that's pretty cold. And this is really where the camper stood out. For those of you who have watched the build series, or at least watched some of my videos, I spent a lot of time and thought into the insulation of this camper. Not only the walls, but other little features like these covers on the windows, and efforts I put into place to try to avoid thermal bridging, insulating the floor. The roof has 4 inches of insulation, and that all paid off. So let's see, how do I want to break this up? The short story is this, I used just a Mr. Buddy heater exclusively on low to heat the camper. And when I was initially building this, and I did a lot of research on heating campers and trailers and stuff like that, my mind really led me to believe that a diesel heater would probably be my best option. And in fact, I actually purchased one of those inexpensive Chinese diesel heaters. But I opted not to install it because I wanted to test and see how it did. And installing, without going into great detail, the way I would have to install the diesel heater would involve me cutting quite a few holes in the side of the camper, and it would take up some space that I would ideally like to use for some other storage. So ultimately, I opted not to install the heater. I carried a Mr. Buddy heater with me, even though I'm sure many of you guys are aware, there are some downsides of those catalytic heaters. And I figured, this very trip, let's put it to the test. Let's see how it does. And the short story is, in my application and my circumstances, and to be frank with you, unless I get caught in something unexpected, I don't really have no intention of camping. I would try to avoid camping in situations where it's below 15 degrees. The Mr. Buddy heater did amazingly well. Now, for those of you know, there's really 2 primary disadvantages with the Mr. Buddy heater, which is what's known as a catalytic heater. When the propane, I don't know if it burns or if it's some other chemical reaction, but whatever happens to the propane that produces the heat, I guess it burns. it releases a lot of moisture in the air, and that's, from a condensation standpoint, that's a concern in small spaces like campers. And then number two is those Mr. Buddy heaters, unless you hook it up to an external propane tank, it can get quite costly using the 1 pound containers. So here's a couple of anecdotes. One night in Flagstaff, when I initially parked, it was about just under 30 degrees. I don't really know how to explain this, but I've never seen the camper inside of here less than about 48 degrees. I bought a little inside-outside temperature gauge that I was monitoring quite closely for these tests. So all I had to do was warm it. I warmed it up in here to about 70, kind of when I settled in for the night and was doing some work on the computer. And basically the easiest way I can describe it is this, is I could turn on the Little Buddy heater for the initial warm-up. I put it on low and I ran it for about 10 minutes. And it warmed it up in here to where I was hot. I shut it off, and basically I only needed to run the Little Buddy heater about 5 minutes for every hour. By the time I went to settle into bed, it had dropped down into the teens. And the last time I fired it up, I did run it for a little bit more than 5 minutes. I probably ran it for about 7 or 8 minutes. And then I went to bed. I slept 6 hours, and then I ended up waking up, not because I was cold. I have a minus 20 sleeping bag here, so I was snug like a little bug in a rug, as they would say. But I did wake up, and I jumped down to immediately check temperature. It was 15 degrees out, and it was 48 degrees inside of the camper. So in a 6-hour period, it cooled off. I don't remember. I think I warmed it up to maybe like 68 or 70. But, for the sake of conversation, I guess what is that? Let's say 20 to 22 degrees. And I'm not even sure this my temperature gauge for the interior is accurate, because when I got up, the floor wasn't cold, and that's probably because of the insulation. And it was chilly in here, but it was not. I think we probably all experienced that freezing cold where, it's almost unbearable. Like, I, casually came out of bed, I fired up the heater, and it wasn't bad. That's pretty amazing. I mean, I don't have, I've never owned like a commercially made camper, but like, I've heard a lot of anecdotes of people that would have to run their Little Buddy heater like continuously. In my case, like a whole night, including sleeping all night, I ran it maybe a combined total of like, let's say I settled in at 6 or 7, and, let's say over a 12-hour period, what is that about? I guess I ran it for about an hour. Is that, if I'm doing that math right? I apologize, Greg, if I'm not. But the Mr. Buddy on low with those 1 pound tanks can run just over 4 hours. So if you did all that math, I could probably, in 15-degree weather, heat this camper for a 4 or 5 day period off of a 1 pound propane tank bottle, which is, about $4. I don't know, man. I think that's pretty efficient. I mean, I have no problem with that. Condensation was a concern. I obviously some of it, because of how I installed and used the insulation, it's a little hard for me to measure it, but I have a few anecdotes. Number one is I was checking underneath the bed. 0. And again, I did insulate the cab over floor portion, but there was no moisture underneath the bed, which I was ecstatic about. I did, if some of you guys have been longtime viewers and watched some of my early videos, I don't know if it's going to show up in this camera, but I did install some slats in there that I was hoping would kind of help with a little bit of air circulation. Maybe they worked, maybe it was insulation, maybe it was a combination of all the above, but 0 condensation under my mattress. Like this pillar right here, this is a thermal bridge. This has a direct connection to the outside. This is not insulated other than the wood value itself. On my last camper that wasn't insulated, every once in a while I could feel right here and it'd be just slightly moist. This was not moist at all. The one place where I did see some condensation build up was if I would open these up to check these out, there was the windows were fogged up. There's some condensation on the windows, which would be expected. Another place is I know of a few spots where if it had condensated on behind this insulation and ran down the walls, there's a few areas where I could check to see if there was any water pooling in or any moisture. And again, I detected none. And that day where it was 15 degrees out, it was also flurrying, and it had about a 10 or 15 mile an hour wind. So you're talking there's some wind chill factor there too. I don't know what that would be, but it was not a calm day, a calm night. A little anecdote to how well these insulated window coverings worked is, like I said, before I went to bed, the windows had fogged up. There was some condensation on the windows. When I woke up in the morning, I opened one of these up. The window completely froze over, but again, it was nowhere near freezing temperatures inside the camper. So these insulated window coverings really did the trick. And I think from the camper's perspective, that's a win. Obviously, none of the all of my water's contained on the insulated inside portion of the camper, so I didn't have any real concerns about any of that kind of thing. The water supply freezing. That was a win, guy. The camper did really phenomenal, and I don't see a need unless I was in Alaska and -degree weather all the time. I don't really see a need to heat this in my application in anything other than using a Mr. Buddy heater. Alright, finally, things I might improve. Like I said, I am globally extremely happy with this camper. I detected no structural issues. It handled well. I was pleased with the gas mileage, the insulation, and basically how well it deals with colder environments with stellar. Again, I mentioned we had a lot of snow, a lot of rain. I detected no evidence of leaks of any kind. And if there was some leak behind some place that ran behind the insulation, it was so minor that it never peeked its head out. And I don't believe that to be the case, but nothing. Everything was sealed up, no problems. If there was one area where I felt like I could see there could be improvement or I might run into problems in the future, that was storage, essentially cabinet space. I have these overhead cabinets and shelves. I have a cabinet that I keep most of my food. I have a little cabinet over to my right underneath the AC unit, and then underneath the sink area I have two cabinets. Most of that space is occupied by water storage. So for what I carry in the camper, food, water, clothing, etc., I have just about enough space. I have a little bit of space left over in one of the cabinets underneath the sink area. The side cabinet that's underneath the AC unit, I have a little bit of space left over. However, if I, like say for example, I bought a bag of potato chips, I put them in there. When the more and more I filled it up, it became harder and harder to get, because I have quite a variety of things in there. So essentially the cabinet space was just enough for me. But I can't imagine that if I were out on longer trips, I feel like I have more than enough food, so I wouldn't worry about food storage. But let's say I wanted to carry some other gear or maybe some more clothing, or if I had multiple people with me, like my kids, for example, I could perhaps start running into some storage issues. And that's a tough one. I mean, for those who followed along my build videos, I put a lot of thought into the cabinet space and how I wanted to arrange it. Say for example, these overhead cabinets, I could have built them to where they came way out, but I had some concerns about hitting my head, making the space feel closed in, stuff like that. So I left them to this seemed to be like kind of the sweet spot. And largely, if I were to build one again, I don't want to modify that because I think that worked out. But I'll cut to the chase. Here's where I think I could improve on some storage space. This dinette area worked out perfect. This was a place where I sat and spent a lot of my time. I wonder, though, is at the floor platform, if I were to build a platform that was about 5 or 6 inches high and then raise the seats an equivalent amount, that would give me quite a bit of storage for a little cabinet underneath my feet, and it would also give me some storage underneath the seats. Now, the downside of that would be twofold. One is I would sit higher in here, so I'm not too tall, but if you had someone that was too tall, they might start to bang their head on this cabinet. The next problem could be that, so when I get into the seat, I stand up and essentially walk in. If I had an elevated platform here on the floor, for me it may not be as big of a problem because I'm a shorter guy, but you would kind of have to maneuver your way in. You'd have to kind of duck as you got in, and I don't know, maybe at the end of the day that wouldn't really be a big problem, but it's something I'm thinking about and might kind of explore in the future. And this kind of brings me back to my final point, guys, is this thing did so well. I enjoyed the build process so much. I've got kind of the bug to build another one. I didn't build this with the intent of selling them. However, if I got the bug and build another one, I would either have to sell this one and keep the new one, or vice versa. And I don't want to give it away. I mean, especially with how much time they take. And the new one, I wouldn't really change a ton from this camper. I was thinking about it on the interior. I might, for the very, add some more storage space by the very mechanisms that I just talked about. I would still use the same technique, the same layout. Like, I don't think that the layout could be any better. Not that I'm not trying to sound, but basically this worked out so well, and I've really thought about like changing spots of stuff, but I think I would leave the layout exactly as it was. But I might change the cabinet color, and so instead of it being kind of a darker, richer color in here, maybe I would go with a lighter wood just to kind of, mix it up a little bit. But that's just, kind of discussion points, so to speak. But I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I'm not going to throw a number out, but in my mind, if I were to take the time to build another one, and I would have to sell one or the other, I have a number in my mind that I kind of have to, I'd have to be able to sell it for to make it really worth my while. And again, I'm not doing this for an economic venture. I really want to just build one as another project, but again, it would kind of break my heart to put all that time and just kind of, when I say give it away, I don't mean literally give it away, but, sell it for some extremely low price. But, so I want you guys out there to kind of give me your feedback. If let's say I built one that was exactly like this, right? I mean, or arguably in the same category. Maybe not what you would pay for it, but like, what do you think it could sell for on the market? There's two campers that use dramatically different construction techniques, but they have about the same weight and size characteristics. I personally think mine is better, to be honest with you, but they sell for a pretty hefty sum, and I don't know if their sales are booming, but it's certainly enough to keep them in business. So, what do you guys think that this thing could go out in the market for somebody who had the money and would pay for it? And if I were to build another one, I would of course chronicle the whole thing in videos, and I would probably change the format of how I did it as opposed to the build of this one, just to make it a little bit more interesting. So, but let me know what you guys think. Is there anything you would change if you were to build this again? And just your general thoughts on it. All right. I really, I've had a lot of new subscribers in the last couple weeks, and I've had a lot of really dedicated people who comment and watch the videos almost the minute they come out. And I really appreciate you guys, and I appreciate everybody who watches this. I'm not a big extrovert, and I didn't necessarily see myself doing this kind of thing, but I don't know. I've had a lot of people talk about they were inspired to build their own campers. They were inspired by the things that I did, and that means a lot. It sounds a bit cliche, but it is nice to know that you're having a positive impact on the world. And for me, getting out and building things and being creative is really a great outlet for me, and one of the most enjoyable things in my life. So thank you guys very much. Continue to comment, continue to like. I don't like the down thumb button, but if you have to do it, you have to do it. And share. If you know somebody else who would like this video, have them watch it. So thanks a bunch, guys. See ya.